This is African American History is American History. Welcome. I'm your host, Harlan Kearsley. This program's goal is to foster understanding, promote discussion, and expand knowledge through stories of historical events, bios of unsung heroes, as well as timely and relevant news stories which, hopefully, will paint a vivid picture of the effects of segregation, discrimination, and bigotry on the lives of both blacks and whites. Comparisons will be made between the many racially fractured periods of American history and what's going on right now.
Named after Sidney Lanier, a poet and Confederate Army veteran, Lake Lanier in northeast Georgia is a popular weekend destination for millions each year. The lake is located just between Gainesville and Beaufort and is suitable for fishing, boating, and suntanning. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimates that some 7.5 million people visit Lake Sidney Lanier annually. But Lake Lanier's existence lends itself to a history of state-sanctioned theft and racial cleansing. Let's start at the beginning. After the Civil War, slaves in the South were emancipated and granted citizenship through constitutional amendments. But by the turn of the 20th century, all Southern states disenfranchised blacks by passing laws to impede voter registration and voting. Georgia Democrats passed such a law in 1908. Resulting in the disenfranchisement of all blacks in the state. In addition, the white-dominated Southern legislatures passed laws imposing racial segregation in public facilities, upholding Jim Crow laws. Now, most rural blacks worked as sharecroppers on white-owned land and were seldom able to get free from poverty. Before its completion in 1956, beneath Lake Lanier were several small towns, once occupied by farmers. One of the more well-known towns absorbed by the lake is Oscarville, although portions of old Oscarville, Georgia still live on the map. The original city survived through lore. Written and oral history did not give the other towns purchased by the state the same grace, and they remain unknown. Oscarville, located north of the perimeter in Forsyth County, began as a small rural town in 1870. After the rape and beating of May Crow, an 18-year-old white woman, on September 8, 1912, an angry mob was formed and began tormenting the black residents of Forsyth County, Georgia. Some reports stated that the beating was so brutal that her eye was dislodged from her skull. The local papers said that she was beaten and died of her injuries. After her death, on September 23rd, the angry mob began burning black-owned churches, houses, and businesses. The two black men who were accused of her death were tried and hung, all on the same day. The local media reported,
"The crowd swelled to over 5,000 spectators. They watched in satisfaction as the lifeless bodies of these two low-brow gorilla-like Negroes hung there, swinging in the Georgia breeze, like laundry on a clothesline."
It has also been noted that the grandniece of May Crow, Debbie Vermaat, thought that her assailants were completely innocent based on her grandmother's account of the incident. 2 weeks prior, Ellen Grice, another white woman, was allegedly raped by a black man. An angry militia hung him without any due process, investigations, or proper trial, and many others have lost their lives far too many times for crimes they never committed. As the mob grew increasingly more violent, They ran off, chased down, and hunted the black residents of Oscarville, Georgia. Eventually, the entire black population of Oscarville and Forsyth County, roughly 1,100 residents, were driven out. To this very day, Forsyth County continues to be recognized as one of the most racist places in the United States. Following this racial cleansing, Lake Lanier, a man-made lake, was created. Lake Lanier was forced upon the land of those affluent, self-sufficient blacks. The Beaufort Dam was also created and flooded in order to cover up the hidden horror of the county's past. There seemed to be very little punishment for racial injustice in Forsyth County. The cover story state and local legislature and news sources sold to the public was that Lake Lanier was flooded to ensure that Georgia was always replenished with a strong water source and to support hydroelectric power for the city of Atlanta. Even in 1956, people continued to lie about the facts of this creative cover-up. White residents even went to the extreme of raising the level of the lake high enough to cover the trees. Later, they came around frequently during the process to cut off the tops of the trees. Some of the stumps from the trees are there even today.
This is African American History is American History.
To be clear, what happened in Oscarville wasn't a freak occurrence. Between the 1860s and the 1920s, white Americans drove thousands of black residents from their communities. Since then, many of these communities have remained almost exclusively white. For example, Pierce City, Missouri, 1901. The white residents lynched 3 black men and banished all 300 of the city's black residents. By the year 2000, the census reported that Pierce City had remained majority white. Out of a population of 1,385, only 3 were black. In 1905, the white residents of Harrison, Arkansas, tried to erase the vibrant, although poor, black community in their town with a race riot. The U.S. Census of 1900 revealed a black community in Harrison of 115 people out of 1,501 residents. Relations between the white and black communities were reported as relatively friendly and stable before the riots. Then came the St. Louis and North Arkansas Railroad, later to be named the Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad, which was built through Harrison in 1901. The residents were giddy with visions of prosperity, but on July 1st, 1905, the railroad went bankrupt. This was a hardship for the townsfolk and the black railroad workers who had moved to the area. The white residents needed someone to blame for their misfortune, and the black folks seemed like as good a scapegoat as any. An angry mob went on a rampage through Harrison's black community. Numbering about 30, they burned down homes, shot out windows, and ordered all African Americans to vacate the town that night. From 1910 to 1920, African Americans fled the brutality of the South and poured into northern industrial cities by the thousands during the Great Migration. They came to find work and later to fill labor shortages created by World War I. Even though they had moved to the North, African Americans continued to face exclusion and discrimination in employment, housing, as well as some segregation in schools and public accommodations. However, Northern black men faced fewer barriers to voting. As their numbers increased, their vote emerged as a crucial factor in elections. The war and migration bolstered a heightened self-confidence in African Americans that would manifest itself in what would be called the New Negro Movement of the 1920s. The NAACP was at the forefront of this movement and lobbied aggressively for a federal anti-lynching law. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. Washington, D.C., 1919. For decades, riots and massacres in all black communities such as these and many others were conveniently left out of the school textbooks. It wasn't until just this year that many white Tulsa, Oklahoma residents learned of the massacre in Greenwood and the destruction of what was once known as Black Wall Street. Since the Reconstruction era, angry whites fueled by resentment and race hatred have used violence to destroy the advances made by blacks. Let us never forget.
This has been African American History is American History. The episode you've been listening to, The Truth About Lake Lanier, was written and directed by Harlan Kearsley. That's me. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so yet, please like and subscribe. Now, once you do, you'll be notified as new episodes are released. Thanks again, and please stay safe. African American History is American History. Copyright H.C. Kearsley, 2021.